now we moved to the cage, which is sort of off of U-Haul and Honesty Hall, and it was the go-between that first year between the turf practice field and the storage areas. So we had music rehearsals in here in the rain. It was also our pre-game staging area on Saturdays after game day morning practice on the turf field, and we had uniforms and instruments and everything going on in the cage. We met at that first meeting at Old Cavalier Hall in the fall semester of '03. There were a number of people who were very interested in the startup efforts. I mentioned them before. Kyle Singleton and David Knight and Woody and I were definitely the names that come to mind. Woody had been a drum major at Lake Braddock in Fairfax County, so he obviously had a good background from a strong high school program in Northern Virginia, which is a very major recruiting area for UVA students in general and for this band. So I think it was a good team we had there as the first drum majors, with the Northern Virginia tie and the local tie with me. As far as working together during the season, and at that time with only we had 111 winds in brass. Obviously dozens more guard and percussion. But with that number, it was just one person to a side of the field. So we play the opener to the home side, one of us would take it, and the other person that week would be on the student away side, and it would be everybody having to watch that one conductor on each side, unless it came to a tune like the Armed Forces Medley that was going to fall apart, which would require staff or graduate assistants to jump in. So we just, every week, we'd see what the show was going to be, and if we had a favorite song, favorite tune, we'd call it, and then we'd figure out which side of the field we were taking from there. The pregame show that first year, we did not have the sabers at that time. I had made a request that we investigate some swords or sabers for the pregame show entrance. Woody shot that down actually the first year. I see Dave, and Dave talked him into it the second year. So he orchestrated that stand and bend your head back to the ground maneuver we tried to pull off. I guess it went over fine. I think it's probably more effective if you're wearing a big hat like those Big Ten schools, but we did it. That was his idea. I think Mr. Peace would say he thought he was getting a contrast in personalities with that team. That first band camp, it was before the Doubletree. We were at the English Inn there on Emmett Street and 29th Bypass. And so from there, we would have to send people out to the park for marching practices, which was at North Grounds near the law school. That was our field for the week and a half of the band camp, and it was grass. This was before the turf days, so weather was a concern. It was field conditions were a concern. Lines painted, yard line markers, things like that. All concerns there. And the music, I actually was not around for the Doubletree, obviously, the Doubletree, the hotel days, so I don't know. I imagine the music sectionals are in nicer facilities then, but we had little conference rooms in the English Inn. I think we had to send people to University Hall for their music sectionals. There just wasn't enough room at that hotel for everybody to have their sectional on the property. So it was a lot of driving our own car. Woody Wingfield and I had to, get in his car and go around to a sectional, find the percussion at the park, find the color guard, who knows where. So it was a lot of running around, coordinating what time the next full band rehearsal would be, making sure everyone was getting the updates on what we were changing in the pregame show, things like that. And we had to hand deliver, the new parts or the new drill page or whatever it was. So even if we had cell phones, obviously, we're not that old, but it required just running around. And the grad assistants, Drew Ross and Sean McCroskey, constantly running back to the headquarters here to rewrite drill or parts for something. I don't know if they got any sleep for that week and a half that we were at band camp. Some of the activities that were started there probably persist. There was a scavenger hunt. There was a skit night, which I hated. But for the scavenger hunt, we had to get a balloon from a grocery store. So people were leaving the hotel to go around, I guess you still do this, go around town and find various things. We had an Olympics, a sectional Olympics here on the turf field. So those sorts of things, they started there from the beginning. I remember the Who's News. That was the daily hard copy paper format of the day's practice schedule and any other news that everybody in the band needed to know. So it came out every day, and it was called Who's News. And yes, Mr. Peace did refer to it as the Mark Time. I guess that's what they called it at Western Michigan. But I believe the grad assistants, Drew Ross probably would remember who came up with that. But we definitely had to pass that out every day at band camp. My favorite football memory from that inaugural season was the road trip. We did get to go on a road trip as a band, actually a couple. The last one wasn't so good, it was Virginia Tech. But the first road trip we took was to Atlanta for the Georgia Tech game in November. And that was not the full band, but it was a chunk, maybe 50 or 60 of us. And Virginia won that game in Atlanta. I remember we got down there Friday night. We stayed at a Marriott near Centennial Park. I remember a group of us walked through the Georgia Tech campus, had a late dinner or midnight snack at a diner there on campus at Georgia Tech. And then we had the football game on Saturday. UVA, I think, won pretty handily. It was several scores. And maybe a poor decision that I lobbied for along with Woody a little bit. We requested and were given permission to play Rugby Road in the stands there at the end of the third quarter. And of course, Rugby Road sounds an awful lot like Ramblin' Wreck from Georgia Tech, one of their songs. So some Georgia Tech students did not appreciate that. And actually, Mr. Peace had him kicked out of the stadium for getting too close to Woody and I as we were directing Rugby Road in the bleachers there. At the last home game that fall, it was Miami. Actually, it was a battle of top 20 teams. We were in the running for the Coastal Division Championship. Came up short. The halftime show for that game, Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy and St. Louis Blues, and then the Armed Forces Medley. Now, it was the last home game of the season, the sixth game. Everybody's starting to get a little tired in November. That Armed Forces Medley was maybe the shakiest thing I've ever been a part of. Even at warm-up, like a couple blocks from the stadium, we used to warm up on O Hill. I was going around to sectionals for the various branches and the key signature for their songs. So standing on the field, we had Mr. Peace had to take one of the podiums, Woody had to take one of the podiums, and I was on one of the podiums. All three of us were across the front sideline for that one because that was going to fall apart at any moment. And I was yelling out the starting note for the trombones, the key signature for the brass, and it wasn't easy either. It was a very, I think they've finally worked it down to a more manageable set of keys, but we had C major and G major for the Marine Corps hymn, just some very difficult stuff in that show. So you may not have known that we were calling out key signatures and starting pitches throughout that first attempt at the Armed Forces Medley at the Miami game. Back when basketball band first started here in the spring semester of '04 at U-Haul, we actually had weekly pickup basketball games on the court here at U-Haul. I guess it's a perk of being in the basketball band and having the director being a fan of playing pickup basketball. So one weeknight every week we'd get together and play basketball. Unfortunately, in one of those pickup basketball games, I decided I was going to take a charge from Kenton Griffin, who's a former high school offensive lineman, then became a trumpet player in the marching band. He would call the block. It was definitely a charge because my leg did not move when he impacted me. So come winter of '04, after the inaugural marching season, I finally got around to getting an MRI on that, and it turned out I had a torn ACL, MCL, and meniscus in that right knee. So right at the end of that academic year, spring of '05, I went in for reconstructive knee surgery. So any idea I had of strenuous athletic activity, which some of that pregame marching Woody had us doing was pretty rigorous, I would have been out of commission for that coming off that knee reconstruction in the spring of '05. Well, after my retirement, after one season and my knee surgery, I agreed, after many requests, to be the assistant high school band director over at Monticello. So third and fourth year, I drove over there to assist the marching band. And I continued doing that through graduate school as well. I just retired finally from that area of work, I guess June of 2012. Finally, we achieved our goal of VPODA honor band status for that program. It only took 9 years. But obviously, going back to start on the instructional side, I think there were many things that we did here that first year that I thought were very helpful and useful for use in a high school setting, whether it's establishing concert arcs for all of your music rehearsals outside, a particular setup of speakers in the bleachers. We hadn't done that before at the high school level, but I definitely had the sound system set up in the bleachers over there for football games from that point on. Even borrowed some music from over here when appropriate for the high school level, because obviously local students are going to be aware of what UVA is playing at football games or in the stands or at basketball games, and so when there's an opportunity to attempt some of the same music with the high school, they really enjoy doing that. We close every practice that first year with the good old song, sung to someone providing a pitch from the band, so that started there from the beginning. I think I was called up the first time to conduct them singing the good old song, so that was the only instruction I had, so I had to find someone, I figured, to give a pitch, and I think Steven Spiller on clarinet provided that. I don't know which pitch it was a good one though. And that, I don't know if they still sing it after every practice. I know they sing it after games, but that started right there in the fall of '04. The handbook, that was a big project. I think Woody and I and David Knight were on the handbook drafting committee, formal committee, but we spent a lot of time on that spring of '04. I wanted to call it the prospectus, and that got voted down for handbook. I thought that was a little too plain of a name for UVA, but I got voted down on prospectus. So here is the drill from that first halftime show, the Saints Hallelujah, Big Noise, America the Beautiful. I don't know how much drill happens these days during the halftime shows, but this was I think Drew Ross may have written this. It was the God opening set for Saints Hallelujah. That was probably my favorite musical selection of the whole season, the Saints Hallelujah, which is probably unfortunate because it was the first thing we played. But that was typical that first year. We'd play 3 tunes, sometimes 4 in the shows. There was no V-Saber at all. Obviously we had this weird, almost looks like God, opening for that first show. The second show was a bunch of squares because then we went into the Olympic fanfare, into the Olympic circles. And then it just changed every week. And in that first stretch of the season, I think we had 4 home games in a row. So it was new drill and lots of drill every week there at the beginning. The march on, I don't want to make it sound too complicated, you would just line up against the brick wall on the away side, wherever your spot was, and we just march it onto the field. Woody or I, whoever was on the west side for the opener, would have to be the one to go out and blow the whistle and get the band to come on the field. So yes, that is probably a good change to have evolved into the set opening position with the V-Saber. I know one of the big shows that first season was we had a Thursday night home game, ESPN game against Clemson, and that was the first big guest artist event here. The Temptations, or what's left of them, came for that halftime. And so that was our first experience of just setting up in an end zone, no drill. That was the only show we didn't have drill for. And trying to coordinate starting and stopping the tunes with the various cues the Temptations were used to doing. The pieces were in some of the singer keys, which can be a little tricky for the band players. So the Temptations have come back, I believe, a few years ago for another performance, and obviously the band has continued that tradition of bringing in professionals and guests, artists that are well known to the halftime shows. But I remember it all started with that Thursday night Temptations halftime show. There has been change, which is to be expected with any group. Some of it is more surprising than other changes from my perspective. From the beginning, we were talking about the pregame show being a tribute to university tradition and to celebrate all of the school songs. All the alumni on the west side would hear familiar songs and sing along, and everybody in the stadium would sing along and things like that. And I think we've gotten away from that. We no longer have the full fight song, we no longer have Rugby Road, we don't have Glory to Virginia, we don't have the good old song in the pregame show. Maybe their time has been truncated by the athletics department, who's to say? I can't say, if someone else can. But they certainly still have high energy in the pregame shows. They charge out of those tunnels. Drew Ross, he left to become the director of bands at Chantilly High School in Fairfax County. He stayed there for a number of years. He just recently left to finish his master's at James Madison University. I talked to him regularly when I was the assistant director at Monticello, and we were running a high school contest every fall. I often would have him be on the judging panel for the Jefferson Classic, and would frequently talk to Drew about getting contacts for drill riders. He custom arranged one of the openers that Monticello did back in around 06 or 07. So Drew and I definitely